The rain in Seattle didn't fall so much as it attacked. November brought a particular cruelty to the Pacific Northwest, the kind of cold that seeped through layers of flannel and denim and settled into bone. Declan Thorne stood on the cobblestone driveway of the Ashford estate, his daughter's small hands gripped tight in his own. Willa shivered on his left, Nora on his right, both of them 6 years old and trying desperately to be brave. Their donated jackets, too large, smelling faintly of mothballs, did nothing against the horizontal sheets of water. The mansion loomed above them all, glass and steel and old Seattle money perched on 3 acres of waterfront property in Mercer Island. Warm light spilled from the windows. Declan could see figures moving inside, could hear the faint clink of crystal and the murmur of conversation. A dinner party, of course. The Ashfords wouldn't let a little thing like their widowed son-in-law's desperation interrupt their social calendar. He pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed somewhere deep in the house, a sound that belonged to people who had never worried about money, never counted pennies for gas, never sold their tools to pay for a funeral. The door swung open. Harrison Ashford filled the frame, 64 years of entitlement wrapped in a cashmere sweater that cost more than Declan's truck. Behind him, Margaret appeared, her silver hair perfect, her expression carefully blank in that way wealthy women perfected the look that said she was above whatever unpleasantness was about to unfold. Harrison's eyes moved from Declan's face to the twins, lingered there for a moment, then returned with something that might have been disgust or might have been fear. Hard to tell with men like Harrison, men who'd spent their lives confusing the two. "You're nothing but a medic who plays with wood scraps." Harrison's voice carried the venom of someone who'd been drinking but wasn't quite drunk yet. "We don't help failures." Margaret stepped forward, her hand resting on her husband's shoulder in a gesture that looked supportive but was really restraint, keeping him from slamming the door immediately. She looked down at Willa and Nora, and for a fraction of a second something human flickered across her face. Then it was gone. "You dragged our daughter into poverty. This is the consequence." Celeste appeared behind them both, 34, and beautiful in the way people are when they've never missed a meal or a salon appointment. She held a champagne flute, and her laugh cut through the rain like glass breaking. "Imagine if the country club saw them. How embarrassing." The heavy oak door swung shut with a finality that echoed across the driveway. The lock clicked. Inside, the party continued. Someone laughed. Someone else clinked a glass. The world of the Ashfords spun on, undisturbed by the man and 2 children standing in the freezing rain outside. Willa's small voice barely made it past the wind. "Daddy, why are they so mean?" Declan pulled both girls close, shielding them with his body as best he could. His jaw set, and something cold and hard settled in his chest right next to where the grief lived. He looked back at that door, at that warm light, at that life his wife had been born into and had chosen to leave. "They'll regret this, I promise." The words felt like an oath, the kind of promise a man makes when he has nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. 3 months earlier, Declan had been in Virginia running a training exercise with a new crop of combat medics, teaching kids barely out of high school how to pack a wound, how to triage under fire, how to keep their hands steady when someone's life depended on it. His phone had rung at 0342 hours. The Seattle Police Department. The words that followed "drunk driver I-5 highway critical condition" had rearranged his understanding of reality. He'd made it to Harborview Medical Center 14 hours later. Too late. Iris had died at 0527 alone, while Declan was somewhere over Kansas, trying not to break his phone from gripping it too hard. The officer who'd been first on scene had given him Iris's belongings in a clear plastic bag. Her wedding ring. Her phone screen shattered. Her purse stained with blood that had soaked through the leather, and her sketch journal, the one she carried everywhere, filled with drawings of the girls of their small apartment in Tacoma, of the life they'd built together on military pay and hope. Declan had opened that journal in the hospital waiting room after they'd told him there was no point in waiting anymore. The last page had notes, not sketches. Iris's handwriting, usually so fluid and artistic, was jagged here, urgent. "Dad's Meridian deal. Something's wrong. Numbers don't add up. Must investigate." He'd stared at those words for 20 minutes, trying to make them mean something other than what they clearly meant, trying to find an interpretation that didn't lead to the dark place his mind was already going. But Iris had been an art historian trained to spot forgeries and inconsistencies. If she'd seen something wrong in Harrison's business dealings, she'd been right. The funeral had cost $8,000. Declan had the money barely, but it had cleaned out everything he'd saved. Harrison had refused to contribute. The exact words delivered via Celeste in a text message, "You married her, your responsibility." Now sitting in his 2005 Ford F-150 in the parking lot of the SeaTac Motel 6, Declan watched the neon sign flicker and tried to figure out how to make $340 last until his next construction gig. The truck's heater rattled and wheezed, fighting a losing battle against the November cold. In the back seat, Willa and Nora slept under a scratchy wool blanket, their breathing soft and even blissfully unaware of how close they were to homelessness. He'd sold everything. His woodworking tools, the ones his mother had given him when he'd gotten out of the Navy, the ones he'd planned to use to start a custom furniture business someday. His medic gear, the tactical bag and equipment he'd accumulated over 8 years of service. Even Iris's jewelry, except for her wedding ring, that he'd keep until the day he died. Construction work paid $130 a day when he could get it, which was maybe 3 days a week. The motel room cost $280 weekly. Groceries, gas, the girls' school supplies, the math didn't work. It had never worked. Declan was good at a lot of things. Had kept men alive under mortar fire, had built furniture that lasted generations, but he couldn't make money appear out of thin air. Willa stirred in the back seat, her small hand reaching out in sleep for something that wasn't there. Her doll, probably. The one Iris had sewn by hand, giving it Willa's features and Iris's smile. It had torn last week, the stuffing coming out, and Declan hadn't had money to buy thread to fix it. He'd tried. God knows he'd tried. 47 job applications in the past month alone. Private security firms, government contractors, anyone who might value his skill set. The rejections all said the same thing in different words. Overqualified psychological concerns, not a cultural fit. What they meant was that combat medics with PTSD and dead wives didn't fit neatly into corporate structures. His phone buzzed. A text from the construction foreman Henderson, a man who seemed to take personal pleasure in making veterans feel worthless. "Need you tomorrow, 600. Bring gloves. Last guy complained about splinters and I fired him. Don't be soft." Declan typed back a simple confirmation. He couldn't afford pride. Pride didn't feed his daughters. The decision to go to the Ashfords hadn't been easy. Declan had spent 3 days convincing himself, wearing down his resistance like water on stone, just for the girls, just until he got on his feet, just a temporary measure, the lies men tell themselves when desperation outweighs dignity. He'd even bought them new clothes for the visit, not new exactly, but newer. Goodwill finds that didn't have holes. He'd combed their hair and practiced what he'd say. Humble but not broken. Honest but not pathetic. A man asking for help for his children, not for himself. It hadn't mattered. Harrison had let them inside, though. That was something. Or maybe it was worse because it meant the rejection was calculated rather than reflexive. The Ashford mansion's interior had been exactly what Declan expected, all high ceilings and original art and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Margaret had been hosting a gathering, 8 or 10 society women, all perfectly coiffed, all holding champagne flutes like props in a play about wealth. They'd stared at Declan and the girls the way people stare at accidents on the highway, horrified but unable to look away. Margaret had served her guests more champagne, made a show of offering canapes, and completely ignored Declan's request for water. For the girls who were thirsty after the bus ride from Tacoma. Celeste had been the cruelest, which somehow hurt more than Harrison's cold dismissal. She'd addressed her mother's guests directly, her voice carrying that Vassar-bred affectation. "This is my sister's mistake. Married a carpenter instead of Senator Bradford's son. Look where it got her." The words had landed like punches. Willa had pressed closer to Declan's leg. Nora had gone very still, the way children do when they're trying to disappear. Harrison had appeared, then his face flushed from whiskey or anger or both. He'd looked at Declan with something approaching contempt, something that suggested he'd been waiting years to say what came next. "You killed Iris by dragging her into that military lifestyle. If she'd stayed in Seattle, married properly, she'd be alive. This is your fault, Thorne." The accusation had hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Part of Declan had wanted to argue, to explain that Iris had chosen their life together, that she'd been happy, that love mattered more than money. But another part, the part that woke up at 3 a.m. remembering the phone call, wondered if Harrison was right. Declan's voice had come out rougher than he'd intended. "Please, just let the girls stay. I'll sleep in my truck. Just give them a warm bed for 2 weeks while I find something stable." Margaret had actually laughed at that. A small, brittle sound. If you can't provide, surrender them to the state. But don't darken my doorstep again. Harrison had stepped closer, close enough that Declan could smell the Macallan on his breath. You're a carpenter with a medic's license. You were never good enough for her. You're certainly not good enough to raise Ashford children. Declan had gathered Willa and Nora, turned toward the door. His hands had shaken with the effort of not putting his fist through Harrison's face. He'd fought in 2 theaters of war, had killed when necessary, but he'd never wanted to hurt someone the way he wanted to hurt Harrison Ashford in that moment. At the door, he'd turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Harrison. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Outside, walking back to the truck through the rain, Declan had noticed a black Mercedes S-Class parked on the street, engine running. As he'd buckled the girls into their seats, the Mercedes window had lowered. An elderly man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses had looked at Declan, studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. A gesture that meant something, though Declan couldn't guess what. Then the window had risen, and the Mercedes had pulled away into the Seattle night. Declan hadn't thought much of it at the time. Rich people in Mercer Island, probably a neighbor wondering about the commotion. 1 week later, the letter arrived. It came via certified mail to the motel, which was strange because Declan hadn't given anyone that address. The envelope was heavy stock paper, cream-colored. The return address read, Harlow and Associates, Estate Law, with a downtown Seattle address in the Columbia Center. Declan had opened it standing in the motel parking lot, rain pattering on the envelope. Dear Mr. Thorne, this firm represents the estate of Theodore Whitmore, recently deceased. A matter has come to our attention regarding your legal status as potential heir. Your presence is requested at our offices at your earliest convenience. This is a time-sensitive matter. Regards, Beatrice Harlow, Esquire. Theodore Whitmore. The name meant nothing to Declan. He'd Googled it on his phone right there in the parking lot. The results had been sparse, but significant. Theodore Whitmore, aerospace billionaire, founder of Whitmore Defense Systems, philanthropist. Died 2 weeks ago in Geneva at age 86. Nothing connected that man to Declan's life. Nothing at all. But time-sensitive and potential heir were words that suggested either money or trouble, and Declan had nothing to lose by finding out which. Beatrice Harlow's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Columbia Center. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Elliott Bay that probably cost more per month than Declan had made in a year. The furniture was all rich mahogany and burgundy leather, the kind of space designed to remind clients that serious money required serious representation. Beatrice herself was a study in understated power. 68 years old, silver hair and a perfect chignon, wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000. Old Seattle money, the kind that didn't need to prove anything because everyone already knew. She'd risen when Declan entered, offered her hand with a grip that was surprisingly firm. Mr. Thorne, thank you for coming. Please sit. Declan had sat in one of the leather chairs, hyper-aware of his Goodwill jacket and work boots, of the way he probably smelled like construction site and cheap motel soap. Beatrice had opened a file, studied him over reading glasses that were definitely Cartier. I've been searching for you for 3 weeks, Mr. Thorne. Your grandfather passed away on October 28th in Geneva, Switzerland. He'd been in poor health for some time, but the end was unexpected. The words had taken a moment to penetrate. I don't have a grandfather. My mother's father died when I was 12. Coal miner in West Virginia. Beatrice had pulled out a photograph, slid it across the desk. An old picture, the kind that had lived in a wallet for decades. A young woman, Declan's mother, maybe 20 years old, standing next to a man in a Navy dress uniform. Between them, a baby. Declan himself no more than 6 months old. Your biological father's father, Mr. Thorne, Theodore Whitmore. Declan had stared at the photo, trying to reconcile the information. His mother had told him his father died before Declan was born. Motorcycle accident. She'd never mentioned the father's name, had gotten tight-lipped and sad whenever Declan asked. Eventually, he'd stopped asking. My father, James Whitmore. Theodore's only son, though the relationship was complicated. James died in a training accident at Fort Benning in 1992, 3 months before you were born. Theodore had planned to acknowledge him to legitimize the relationship, but James's death came first. Beatrice had pulled out more documents. DNA results processed through some lab in California, a 99.7% match between Declan's genetic profile and Theodore Whitmore's. We obtained a sample from you legally, well, quasi-legally. A coffee cup you discarded at a gas station in Tacoma 2 weeks ago. I apologize for the intrusion, but Theodore's will required genetic confirmation. Declan's mind had been reeling. A grandfather he'd never known. A father he'd never met. A whole branch of family history that had been hidden from him his entire life. Why now? Why didn't he contact me before? Beatrice's expression had softened the first crack in her professional facade. Theodore was brilliant but emotionally limited. He watched you from a distance your entire life, followed your military career, your marriage to Iris, the birth of your daughters. He was immensely proud of you. The words had felt like salt in a wound Declan didn't know he had. If he was so proud, where was he when Iris died? When I was selling my tools to pay for her funeral? When I was living in a motel with my daughters? He was dying, Mr. Thorne, and trying to put his affairs in order to protect you. Beatrice had opened a larger folder, pulled out documents that looked important and legal and completely overwhelming. Theodore Whitmore's will names you as his primary beneficiary. You inherit Whitmore Manor, a Victorian mansion in Capitol Hill. You inherit controlling shares in Whitmore Defense Systems and Whitmore Foundation. You inherit his personal art collection valued at approximately $287 million. And you inherit all holdings of North Star Capital, a private equity firm Theodore acquired 3 years ago. The numbers had been too large to process. Declan had just stared at Beatrice, waiting for the punchline, the catch, the moment when this turned into some elaborate scam. I don't understand. Why me? He never even met me. Because you're his only living heir. And because, according to his personal notes, you were the only one who proved worthy. Beatrice had pulled out another document, this one looking more like a balance sheet. North Star Capital currently holds various assets including primary mortgages and business loans for several Seattle companies. She'd paused, and something almost like satisfaction had crossed her face. Including Ashford Industries and the Ashford family estate in Mercer Island. The words had landed with the weight of revelation. Declan had leaned forward in his chair. Harrison doesn't know. The ownership is structured through shell companies. As far as Harrison Ashford knows, he owes money to North Star Capital. He has no idea that North Star Capital is owned by Theodore's estate, which means as of this morning it's owned by you. Declan had sat back, his mind racing through implications. Harrison had slammed a door in his face, had called him worthless, had blamed him for Iris's death. And all the while Declan had owned the mortgage on Harrison's mansion, had held the power to destroy everything the Ashfords had built. The irony was almost poetic. There's one more thing. Beatrice had produced a sealed envelope, cream-colored and heavy, with "To the Warrior" written in shaky handwriting on the front. Theodore left this for you, to be opened in my presence. Declan had broken the seal with hands that shook slightly. The letter inside was handwritten, the script getting less steady toward the end, as if Theodore had been fighting against time or illness or both. Declan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I never met you. Cowardice, perhaps, or fear you'd reject me like your father rejected his birthright. I watched you become the man I wish I'd been. You chose honor over comfort, family over fortune, love over legacy. When you married Iris, I knew you were worthy. But I had to test you one more time. I'm sorry for that. I see now it was cruel. The Ashfords are dangerous, Declan. Harrison owes debts to people you fought overseas. I bought his loans to protect you. Use that leverage. Protect your children. But also, save Harrison if you can. Everyone deserves redemption. You are my grandson. You are a Whitmore. Use this power wisely. Your grandfather Theodore. Declan had read the letter twice, then a third time. The words about testing him stung. The implication that Theodore had watched him struggle, had known about Iris's death, and had done nothing until it was too late, that burned. But the part about Harrison owing debts to dangerous people, about enemies Declan had fought overseas, that was information he needed. Mrs. Harlow, you said Theodore's death was unexpected. What did you mean? Beatrice had hesitated, and in that hesitation Declan had seen something he recognized from his combat medic days. The look people got when they knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it. Theodore had been ill, yes, pancreatic cancer stage 4, but he was stable, responding to treatment. His doctors expected he had another 6 months. Then he traveled to Geneva for a business meeting, and 3 days later he was dead. Heart failure, the Swiss authorities said. But Theodore's cardiologist in Seattle had examined him 2 weeks prior and found his heart strong. She'd pulled out medical records, showed Declan the discrepancies. A healthy heart suddenly failing. Blood work that showed trace amounts of something the Swiss coroner had dismissed as anomalous. "You think someone killed him?" I think Theodore was about to cut Harrison Ashford loose from his debts and expose some very powerful people. I think those people had motivation to ensure he didn't live long enough to do so. But I can't prove it. The Swiss closed the investigation almost immediately. Declan had stared at the documents, his mind making connections. Theodore dies under suspicious circumstances. Iris dies in what looks like a drunk driving accident, but with notes about investigating Harrison's business deals. Both deaths convenient for whoever wanted to keep those business deals secret. I need to see the manor. Of course. I've arranged for Margot Webb, the estate manager, to meet us there this afternoon. She's been with Theodore for 40 years. If anyone knows his secrets, it's Margot. Whitmore Manor sat on a hill in Capitol Hill, a neighborhood that had somehow survived Seattle's tech boom while maintaining its historic character. The house was Victorian, built in 1889, according to the bronze plaque near the front door, all gabled roofs and wraparound porches and stained glass windows that caught the afternoon light and threw colored shadows across the lawn. It was beautiful and slightly run down, the kind of neglect that happens when someone loves a place but can no longer maintain it. The gardens were overgrown but not wild, the paint was faded but not peeling. The whole property had an air of gentle decline. Margot Webb waited on the porch, a woman in her early 70s with steel-gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she'd seen everything and been disappointed by most of it. She wore sensible shoes and a cardigan that had been high quality once, and when she looked at Declan, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to something softer. "You have his eyes, James's eyes, your father's." She'd extended a hand and her grip was strong, calloused. This was a woman who worked with her hands, who understood the value of practical things. "Mr. Thorne, or should I call you Declan, Theodore spoke of you often in his final months. He wanted desperately to meet you." Willa and Nora had climbed out of the truck, staring up at the mansion with wide eyes. Margot had smiled at them, the kind of genuine warmth that couldn't be faked. "And these must be the little ones." Theodore had photographs of you in his study. Willa and Nora. Yes, he loved children. Built a treehouse in the back garden, though he never had grandchildren to use it. Until now, I suppose. She'd led them inside, and the interior had been even more impressive than the exterior. High ceilings with crown molding, original hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, a grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. Everything was dusty and slightly faded like a museum after hours, but the bones were solid. This was a house built to last generations. Margot had shown them the library, first floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with first editions and leather-bound volumes, then the kitchen, huge and old-fashioned but with good bones, the drawing room, the dining room, the conservatory where Theodore had apparently spent his final mobile months reading and watching the garden. Willa had tugged on Declan's hand. "Daddy, can we live here?" "Maybe, sweetheart. We'll see." Margot had smiled at that, then led them upstairs. 6 bedrooms, each one larger than the entire motel room they'd been living in. The master bedroom had a 4-poster bed and a fireplace and windows that looked out over downtown Seattle. And above the fireplace, hidden behind a portrait that swung out on hinges, was a wall safe. "Theodore told me to show you this." Margot had produced a key from her pocket. "He said when the time came you'd know what to do with what's inside." She'd opened the safe, revealing not money or jewelry, but documents, files, and a journal, leather-bound and worn, Theodore's handwriting filling the pages. Declan had pulled out the journal, opened it to a random page. Theodore's entry from 3 years ago: "Purchased Harrison Ashford's debts today. The man has gotten himself into bed with Meridian Capital, which is nothing more than a front for the kind of people I spent my career refusing to do business with. Arms dealers, money launderers, worse. If he continues down this path, it will destroy him. And if my grandson marries Ashford's daughter, it will destroy him too. I must intervene." The implications had sent a chill through Declan. Theodore had known about Harrison's criminal connections before Declan had even married Iris, had tried to protect them, had bought the debts to give Declan leverage when the time came. Beatrice had appeared in the doorway. "There's one more condition to the inheritance, Declan. Theodore's will specifies that Whitmore Manor must be restored to its original glory within 2 years and used for community purposes, specifically education and arts programming. If you fail to meet that condition, the entire estate goes to charity. She'd handed him another document, this one outlining the specifics. The manor had to be historically accurate. Restoration had to serve at least 200 community members per month, had to provide free or low-cost programming. He wanted to test you one final time, to see if you'd value legacy over easy money. The art collection alone could be sold for $287 million. You could walk away rich and never work again. Or you can honor Theodore's vision and build something that lasts. Declan had looked at Willa and Nora, who were exploring the bedroom opening drawers and marveling at the space. He'd thought about Iris, who had loved historic preservation, who had spent her graduate work studying Victorian architecture. He'd thought about Theodore, a grandfather he'd never met, but who had watched over him from a distance, who had tried in his complicated way to protect and provide. "I accept the conditions. We'll restore the manor." Margot had smiled, the first real smile Declan had seen from her. "Theodore said you would. He also said to tell you the servant quarters are fully livable. You and the girls can move in today if you'd like. Better than a motel, I imagine." Declan had felt something in his chest loosen, the first easing of the constant pressure he'd been carrying since Iris died. Not relief exactly, but hope, the faint possibility that they might survive this after all. "Thank you, we will." 3 days later, while Declan was cataloging the manor's extensive library with Margot's help, Beatrice had called. Her voice had been tight controlled in a way that suggested bad news delivered professionally. "Declan, I've sent notification to Harrison Ashford that North Star Capital now operates under new ownership and all existing loan agreements are under review. It's standard procedure for ownership transitions, but given your relationship, I thought you should know before he reacts." "How do you think he'll react?" "Poorly. Harrison's been in financial trouble for 5 years. He borrowed heavily from Meridian Capital to cover losses in some offshore drilling ventures that went bad. Meridian has been using that debt as leverage, forcing him to facilitate certain transactions through Ashford Industries." "What kind of transactions?" "The kind your grandfather spent his career avoiding. Arms shipments primarily. Components manufactured legitimately by Ashford Industries but diverted to unauthorized buyers." Theodore had been building a case, gathering evidence. He planned to give Harrison a choice: testify against Meridian or face prosecution himself. Declan had felt pieces clicking into place. Iris's notes about Meridian, Theodore's letter mentioning dangerous people, Harrison's desperation. And then Theodore died before he could make that offer. "Exactly, which leaves you holding all the cards. Harrison's mortgage, his business loans, his freedom, it all depends on what you decide to do." Declan had looked around the library at the books Theodore had collected at the life he'd built. Brilliant but emotionally limited, Beatrice had said. A man who'd watched his grandson struggle from afar rather than step in and help. But also a man who'd planned for this moment, who'd given Declan the tools he needed to protect his daughters and maybe, just maybe, to find justice for Iris. "Harrison humiliated me, called me worthless, slammed a door in my daughters' faces during a rainstorm. I'm aware. But he's still Willa and Nora's grandfather, and Iris loved him once before everything went wrong between them." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need more information before I decide anything. I need to know exactly what Harrison's involved in, who Meridian Capital really is, and whether there's any connection between their business and Iris's death." There had been a long silence on the other end of the line. "Declan, if you start digging into this, you'll attract attention. Meridian Capital isn't just a shady private equity firm. They're connected to international arms dealers, money launderers worse. Theodore was a billionaire with resources and protection, and they still managed to kill him." "Maybe, but I'm not Theodore. I don't have billions to lose or a reputation to protect. I'm just a medic with carpentry skills and nothing left to lose except my daughters. And I'll burn down anyone who threatens them." "Then I'll help. But Declan, be careful. These people don't play by rules. Neither do I. Not anymore." Declan had hung up and returned to the library where Willa and Nora were sitting at Theodore's old desk, coloring in notebooks Margot had found for them. They looked happy, safe. For the first time in months, they looked like children instead of refugees. That was worth fighting for. Worth anything. The envelope had arrived 2 weeks later, cream-colored and high quality, the return address reading Aurora Ridge Country Club, Membership Committee. Declan had opened it, standing in the Manor's kitchen, coffee cooling in his hand. Dear Mr. Thorne, on behalf of the Aurora Ridge Country Club Board of Directors, we cordially invite you to the annual Winter Gala on December 4th. As a new member of Seattle's business community, we feel you would be an excellent addition to our organization. Black tie, cocktails at 7 p.m. We look forward to your attendance. New member of Seattle's business community. They'd done their research, learned about his inheritance, smelled fresh money. Old Seattle families didn't care where wealth came from as long as there was enough of it. Declan had called Beatrice immediately. The country club invitation. Who owns Aurora Ridge? It's a private club, so ownership is complicated. There's a board, but majority shares are held by a real estate investment trust. Why? Can we buy it? Beatrice had laughed, though the sound carried an edge of respect. The REIT that owns it is having financial troubles. They'd probably sell for the right price. 15, maybe 18 million. Buy it, today if possible, and don't tell them who the buyer is until after the sale goes through. Declan, what are you planning? Harrison and Margaret host their winter gala there every year. It's their biggest social event. I want to be there when they arrive. That's vindictive. No, that's justice. They slammed a door in my face when I begged for help. Now I'm going to open a door and watch them walk through it into a world where they have no power. Beatrice had been quiet for a moment. I'll make the calls. But Declan, publicly humiliating them might feel good, but it won't get you the information you need about Meridian Capital. It will if it makes Harrison desperate enough to make mistakes. Desperate men do desperate things, and desperate things leave evidence. You're thinking like a soldier. I am a soldier. I'm just fighting a different kind of war now. The purchase had gone through in 36 hours. $18 million cash through a shell company Beatrice had set up. The country club board had been thrilled. The real estate investment trust had been relieved. And Harrison Ashford, preparing for his annual gala, had no idea that the venue had just changed ownership. Declan had spent the 2 weeks leading up to the gala preparing. Bought a tuxedo bespoke from a tailor in Pioneer Square who'd dressed 3 generations of Seattle money. Got his hair cut at a barber who charged $200 and was worth every penny. Practiced looking comfortable in spaces designed to make people like him feel uncomfortable. Margot had helped teaching him which fork to use, how to hold a champagne flute, the subtle signals of old money versus new. She'd been patient and kind, never making him feel stupid for not knowing things he'd never had reason to learn. You're a quick study, she'd said the day before the gala, watching him navigate a practice place setting. Theodore would be proud. Theodore watched me struggle for 32 years and never once offered help. He was flawed, emotionally stunted perhaps, but he loved you in his way. Love requires action. Watching from a distance isn't love, it's voyeurism. Margot had nodded, not defending Theodore but not condemning him either. Perhaps. But you're here now. You have resources. You can choose what kind of man you'll be with that power. I already know what kind of man I am. I'm the kind who protects his daughters and honors his wife's memory. Then Theodore chose well. The night of the gala, Declan had stood in front of the mirror in the master bedroom adjusting his bow tie. The tuxedo fit perfectly, made him look like someone who belonged in spaces like Aurora Ridge Country Club. But underneath the fabric, he was still the same man who'd stood in the rain begging Harrison Ashford for help. The difference was that now he had power, now he had leverage, now he could make them feel what he'd felt. Willa had appeared in the doorway wearing pajamas Margot had bought her. "Daddy, you look fancy." "Thanks, sweetheart. Are you going to see Grandpa Harrison?" The question had stopped Declan cold. He'd been so focused on the strategy on the confrontation that he hadn't thought about how to explain it to his daughters. "Yes, I'm going to see him." "Will you tell him we miss Mommy?" "I will." "Will you tell him we forgive him for being mean?" Declan had knelt down, taken Willa's small hands in his. "Do you forgive him?" She'd thought about it with the seriousness only 6-year-olds could manage. "Mommy said forgiveness is for us, not for them. It helps us not be sad all the time." Iris's words coming back through their daughter. Declan had felt his throat tighten. "Your mommy was very smart. So are you going to forgive him?" "I'm working on it, sweetheart. It's harder for grown-ups sometimes, because grown-ups hold grudges." Something like that. Willa had hugged him, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. "I think Mommy would want you to be happy, not angry." She'd padded off to bed, leaving Declan alone with thoughts that weren't as clear as they'd been 10 minutes ago. The Aurora Ridge Country Club sat on 20 acres of prime Seattle real estate, all rolling lawns and old-growth trees, and a view of the Sound that made grown men weep. The building itself was craftsman-style, built in 1912 by lumber barons who'd wanted a place to drink scotch and make deals away from their wives and the public. Tonight, it blazed with light. Valets parked Mercedes and BMWs. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns streamed through the entrance. Seattle's elite gathered to celebrate another year of being elite. Declan arrived alone, driving a BMW 7 Series he'd leased that morning specifically for this entrance. The valet took his keys with the kind of deference that came with luxury vehicles and tailored clothing. Inside, the ballroom was exactly as ostentatious as he'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows, tables dressed in white linen and gold chargers. A string quartet played something classical in the corner. Champagne flowed. Money whispered. Harrison and Margaret held court near the center of the room, surrounded by investors and sycophants. Harrison looked diminished, somehow older than he'd seemed 2 weeks ago. The stress was showing. Margaret's smile was brittle, her laugh forced. Declan watched from the mezzanine level, staying in shadow. He wanted them to settle, to feel safe before he made his move. Celeste appeared next to her mother, wearing a red dress that was cut low and cost too much. She was laughing at something an older man said, but the laugh didn't reach her eyes. Up close, she looked tired, haunted even. An investor approached, Harrison voice carrying across the room. "Bob, is it true North Star Capital is reviewing your loans?" "That's concerning." Harrison's smile tightened. "Routine procedure, new ownership, new protocols, nothing to worry about." "But who is the new owner?" "The business community's been buzzing about it for 2 weeks. Some tech millionaire, probably. They're buying up everything in Seattle these days." Margaret touched Harrison's arm, a gesture that looked supportive, but was probably a warning. "Keep it together. Don't show weakness." Declan descended the grand staircase, slowly timing each step. He wanted eyes on him before he reached the bottom, wanted the moment to build. It worked. Conversations stuttered and stopped as people noticed him. The whispers started near the stairs and rippled outward. "Who is that? Never seen him before. Good-looking fellow. Wait, isn't that the son-in-law? Can't be. He's poor. He's wearing Tom Ford. That's not poor." Declan walked straight through the crowd, his path clear because people stepped aside instinctively. Something about his bearing, his certainty, made them move. He stopped 3 feet from Harrison Ashford. Harrison turned, annoyance flashing across his face at the interruption. Then recognition hit, followed by shock, followed by something that might have been fear. "You." One word loaded with confusion and anger and the dawning realization that something had gone very wrong. Declan smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Harrison. Margaret. Celeste. Lovely party." Margaret's face had gone pale. Celeste looked between Declan and her father, trying to understand how the carpenter who'd begged on their doorstep was now standing in Aurora Ridge Country Club wearing a tuxedo that cost more than some cars. Harrison's voice came out strangled. "Security! Get this man out of here! He's trespassing!" 2 large security guards in blazers started moving toward Declan. He didn't flinch, didn't look at them, kept his eyes locked on Harrison. "This is a members-only club, Harrison." "Exactly. You're not a member. You're not welcome here." Declan pulled a document from his inside jacket pocket, unfolded it with deliberate slowness. "Actually, as of 4 p.m. today, I'm more than a member. I'm the owner." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to stop playing, though they probably hadn't. Harrison's face went from pale to red. "That's impossible. The board would never—" "The board didn't sell to me. They sold to Cascade Holdings, LLC, which is a subsidiary of North Star Capital, which is owned by the Theodore Whitmore estate, which is controlled by me. Your accountant can explain the details if you'd like." Declan turned to address the room, his voice carrying clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption, but I need to exercise a provision in the club's bylaws. Section 4. Paragraph 2. Membership can be revoked immediately for conduct unbecoming of a gentleman or lady." He turned back to Harrison, and his voice went cold. Slamming a door in the face of your grieving grandchildren during a freezing rainstorm while they begged for shelter. I'd call that conduct unbecoming, wouldn't you? Margaret made a sound that might have been a sob or might have been denial. Celeste stood frozen, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Harrison's voice shook with rage and humiliation. You can't do this. I founded this gala. This is my event. It was your event. Now it's mine. And you're no longer welcome here. Declan signaled to the security guards who'd been approaching him. They stopped, looked at the club manager who'd appeared from somewhere, and the manager nodded confirmation. Mr. Harrington, Mrs. Harrington, Miss Harrington, we're going to have to ask you to leave. The room watched in stunned fascination as Seattle's elite witnessed their own being cast out. Harrison's face was purple now, veins standing out on his neck. Margaret was crying silent tears that ruined her makeup. Celeste just looked broken. The security guards escorted them toward the exit. Harrison stopped at the door, turned back to look at Declan with pure hatred in his eyes. Declan raised his champagne glass in a silent toast. The door closed. The room remained silent for another heartbeat. Then Declan turned to the assembled crowd, his expression shifting from cold satisfaction to warm hospitality. Please, ladies and gentlemen, don't let that unpleasantness ruin your evening. The open bar is on me for the rest of the night. Enjoy. The music started again. Conversations resumed louder and more frantic than before. Everyone wanted to know who Declan Thorne was, where he'd come from, how he'd managed to topple Harrison Ashford. Declan felt no joy in it, no satisfaction, just a cold, hard certainty that this was only the beginning. Harrison would make mistakes now, desperate, angry mistakes, and those mistakes would lead Declan to the truth about Meridian Capital, about Iris's death, about all of it. He walked to the balcony for air, leaving the party behind. The city spread out below, lights reflecting off the Sound Seattle in all its rainy glory. His phone buzzed. A text from Beatrice. Well played, but now you've made an enemy. Be careful. Declan typed back, I've had enemies before. They didn't end well. He looked out at the city, at the life he was building from the ashes of the one he'd lost, and made a silent promise to Iris, to Theodore, to his daughters sleeping safely in Whitmore Manor. This wasn't over. Not by half. But for the first time since that phone call 3 months ago, Declan Thorne felt like he was winning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made Seattle feel like living inside a cloud. Declan stood outside the Ashford Industries headquarters, a glass and steel tower in the South Lake Union district that reeked of tech boom money trying to disguise old manufacturing roots. The building's lobby featured abstract art that cost more than most people's houses, and a receptionist who looked at Declan with the practiced smile of someone trained to identify wealth by shoe brand. Her expression shifted when Beatrice appeared beside him, her presence carrying the weight of old Seattle power that no amount of new money could manufacture. Mr. Thorne is here for the executive board meeting. Harrison Ashford is expecting us. The lie came smoothly. Harrison wasn't expecting them at all. They rode the elevator to the 14th floor in silence. Beatrice reviewed documents on her tablet while Declan studied his reflection in the polished steel doors. The man looking back was a stranger. Tailored suit, confident posture, the bearing of someone who belonged in rooms where decisions worth millions got made before lunch. But underneath the costume he was still the medic who'd counted pennies for gas, still the father who'd sold his tools to bury his wife. The conference room overlooked Lake Union, all floor-to-ceiling windows, and a table that could seat 20 but currently held only 3. Harrison sat at the head, looking like he'd aged a decade since Saturday night. His CFO, a nervous man named Miller who couldn't have been older than 35, shuffled papers with hands that shook slightly. And Margaret sat beside her husband, which surprised Declan. She never involved herself in business matters, preferred the cleaner world of charity galas and garden clubs. Harrison stood when they entered his chair, scraping back so violently it nearly tipped. Get out. You have no right to be here. Declan walked to the opposite end of the table, set his briefcase down with careful precision. Sit down, Harrison, or I call North Star Capital's loan due in full right now, and you lose this building by noon. Miller's face went white. He looked at Harrison with something approaching panic. Sir, he owns the debt. All of it. The restructuring agreement gives him that authority. Harrison's jaw worked, grinding teeth that probably cost $10,000 in dental work. He sat slowly like a man lowering himself into cold water. How did you get Theodore's money? You're nobody. A carpenter playing soldier. Declan pulled out the inheritance documents, slid them across the polished wood. Theodore Whitmore was my grandfather. Biological grandfather. He left me everything: the art collection, the aerospace company, the foundation, and North Star Capital, which means I own every dollar you owe. Margaret made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Her hands twisted in her lap rings, catching the gray light filtering through the windows. Iris's father-in-law. She never mentioned him. She didn't know. I didn't know. Theodore preferred watching from a distance to actually participating in people's lives. Beatrice set a folder on the table, opened it to reveal financial statements that made Miller look like he might vomit. Ashford Industries is bleeding capital. $50 million in debt, most of it to shell companies operated by Meridian Capital. Your offshore drilling investments lost everything. You've been using legitimate aerospace component manufacturing to cover other shipments. Harrison's eyes went dead, the look of a cornered animal deciding whether to fight or flee. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Theodore knew. He bought your debts 3 years ago to protect his grandson from whatever mess you were making. Now that protection passes to me. Declan leaned forward, his voice dropping to something colder than the rain outside. Here's what happens next. I inject $50 million into Ashford Industries. Cash. Today. In exchange, I take 51% controlling interest. I become chairman of the board. You stay on as CEO, but you report to me. Every check over $10,000 requires my signature. Every hiring decision comes through me. Every shipping manifest crosses my desk. Harrison's face cycled through emotions: rage, humiliation, calculation. The calculation won the way it always did with men who'd spent their lives making deals. What's the alternative? Foreclosure, bankruptcy. Federal investigation into what's really in those shipping containers from Eastern Europe. Your choice. Miller pushed a document across the table with trembling hands. Sir, the cash injection would save us. The company survives. You keep your title, your salary, your reputation. You just don't have final say anymore. Margaret's voice cut through, quiet but sharp. Sign it, Harrison. We've already lost everything else this weekend. Don't lose the company, too. The pen scratched across paper with a sound that reminded Declan of bones breaking. Small, final, irreversible. Harrison's signature looked angry, the loops tight and controlled. Declan took the contract, examined it, then stood. Welcome to the team, Bob. I'll be in your office this afternoon. Have Miller prepare full server access, financial records, shipping logs, emails, everything. Complete transparency, or I walk and you fall. He left Harrison sitting at that table, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just the cold certainty that this was a means to an end. Information was the real currency now, and he'd just bought access to all of it. The executive suite that had been Harrison's for 20 years smelled like leather and defeat. Declan sat in the chair that still held warmth from its previous occupant and logged into the computer system with credentials Miller had provided, along with a nervous explanation that encryption keys were stored in a hidden file directory. Mr. Thorne, some of those files are sensitive. Mr. Ashford kept them compartmentalized for a reason. I'm sure he did. You can go, Miller. And if you warn Harrison I'm digging through his secrets, I'll have forensic accountants here by morning. They'll find every irregularity, every missing dollar, and you'll share whatever cell he ends up in. Miller fled. Declan spent the next 6 hours swimming through digital evidence of a company eating itself from within. The legitimate business aerospace components for commercial aircraft was actually profitable. Harrison had real engineering talent, had built relationships with Boeing and Airbus that generated steady revenue. But somewhere around 2019, the expenses started outpacing income. Bad investments in offshore drilling, the kind of bet that looked smart on paper until oil prices crashed and left investors holding worthless leases. That's when Meridian Capital had appeared, first as a loan to cover the losses, then as a partner in a logistics optimization venture that promised to reduce shipping costs by routing components through Vancouver instead of direct from suppliers. The savings had been marginal, but Harrison had needed any win he could get, except the logistics optimization was a cover. Declan found the smoking gun in a shipping manifest from 18 months ago, buried in an encrypted folder that required 3 passwords to access. Container 47B listed as carrying 500 pounds of titanium fasteners from a Czech supplier to Ashford's Seattle facility. but the actual weight recorded at Vancouver Customs was 2,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds of something that wasn't titanium fasteners. Declan pulled up more manifests. The pattern repeated every 6 to 8 weeks. Containers coming from Eastern Europe routed through Vancouver to bypass U.S. Customs scrutiny, arriving in Seattle, weighing far more than their documentation claimed. And the receiving company was always the same: Obsidian Logistics, LLC, a Meridian Capital subsidiary. He'd seen this playbook before. Syria, 2018. His medical unit had treated civilians injured by weapons that shouldn't have existed in that region. Russian-made small arms with serial numbers traced to a manufacturing facility that had supposedly shut down years earlier. Naval intelligence had tracked the supply chain to a network of shell companies, one of which had been called Obsidian something. The details were classified, buried in reports Declan wasn't supposed to have seen, but had because combat medics ended up knowing things that crossed their tables in field hospitals. Harrison wasn't just in debt. He was smuggling weapons for the same network Declan had spent 8 years fighting overseas. His phone rang. Private investigator named Sarah Vance, former FBI, who'd left the Bureau over philosophical differences about jurisdiction and had taken Declan's money to dig into Iris's death. "I've got the accident reconstruction report. You're not going to like it. Tell me." Thomas Palmer, the drunk driver. 52 accountant for a mid-sized firm in Bellevue. BAC at .19, way over the legal limit. But here's the thing. Palmer's credit card shows he had 2 drinks at a bar in Fremont, paid his tab at 9:45 p.m. The crash happened at 10:15. 2 drinks over 90 minutes doesn't get a 190-pound man to .19. Declan's grip tightened on the phone. He was dosed. Toxicology confirms Rohypnol in his system. The coroner noted it but attributed it to possible recreational use, didn't flag it as suspicious. But I pulled Palmer's medical history. No history of drug use, no psychiatric medications, nothing that suggests he'd voluntarily take a date rape drug. What else? Palmer's bank account shows a $50,000 deposit 2 days before the crash. Wire transfer from a Cayman Islands account registered to a company called Meridian Financial Services. Same parent company as Meridian Capital. The room tilted slightly. Declan forced himself to breathe, to think like a medic triaging a critical patient instead of a husband learning his wife was murdered. The car, Palmer's car. What model? Papers rustled on Vance's end. 2019 Honda Accord. Why? That year has electronic throttle control, computer-managed acceleration, can be hacked remotely if you have the right equipment. Jesus, you think they remote-controlled him into Iris? I think they drugged him unconscious, programmed his car to accelerate into oncoming traffic, and made it look like drunk driving. Clean, untraceable, and convenient because a drunk driver dying in the crash he caused doesn't raise the kind of questions a professional hit would. Vance was quiet for a long moment. The dash cam footage from a semi that was behind Palmer's car shows his brake lights never came on. Not once. The car just accelerated straight into Iris's lane. If Palmer was conscious and drunk, he would have at least tried to brake. Where's Palmer's car now? Impounded, scheduled for auction next month. Seattle PD closed the investigation after the coroner ruled accidental death. Buy the car, I don't care what it costs, and get me someone who can examine the computer systems for evidence of remote access. Declan, if you're right about this, if Meridian Capital murdered Iris to keep her quiet about whatever she found in Harrison's business dealings, then I'm going to destroy them. Every last one. He hung up before Vance could warn him about being careful, or thinking clearly, or any of the other reasonable things people said to men consumed by grief and rage. The files on Harrison's computer swam back into focus. Declan searched for any mention of Iris, any indication that Harrison had known his daughter was investigating him. He found it in an email thread from 6 months ago, archived but not deleted. Harrison to an address that resolved to Preston Aldridge, CEO of Meridian Capital. My daughter has been asking questions about our Vancouver routing. She found discrepancies in the weight manifests. I told her it's a customs documentation error, but she's not convinced. She has her mother's stubbornness. Preston's reply 2 hours later. Handle it. If she becomes a problem, we'll handle it for you. Harrison again. She's my daughter. I can manage my own family. Preston. For your sake, I hope so. No more emails in the thread after that. 2 weeks later, Iris was dead. Declan's hands shook as he forwarded the emails to his personal account, then to Beatrice, then to an encrypted cloud server as backup. Evidence. The kind that could put Harrison in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, Preston for actual murder, and dismantle Meridian's entire operation. But evidence required law enforcement who weren't already bought, required jurisdictions that would prosecute, required time that Declan's daughters didn't have if Meridian decided the new owner of Ashford Industries was as much a threat as the old owner's daughter had been. His phone buzzed again. Margot from Whitmore Manor. Her voice carried tension that didn't match her usual unflappable demeanor. "Declan, I think we're being watched. There's a black SUV parked across the street. It's been there for 3 hours. 2 men inside, professional looking. They're not trying to hide. Lock all the doors. Activate the security system Theodore installed. I'm on my way." The girls are fine. They're doing homework in the library with the door locked. "But Declan, these men look like the kind who don't care about locked doors." 20 minutes. Don't open for anyone except me." He grabbed the files he needed, shoved them in his briefcase, and took the elevator down at a run. The BMW's engine roared to life, and Declan drove like he was back in combat zones, taking corners too fast and running yellow lights that were really red. Capitol Hill traffic slowed him. He forced himself to breathe, to think tactically instead of emotionally. Meridian wouldn't move against the girls directly, not yet. That would bring law enforcement heat they couldn't control. But they would send a message. Make it clear that Declan's new position came with risks he couldn't mitigate by throwing money around. The SUV was still parked outside Whitmore Manor when Declan arrived. He pulled into the driveway, got out slowly, making himself visible. Let them see he wasn't afraid. 2 men emerged from the vehicle. Both wore suits that didn't quite hide the bulk of shoulder holsters. Both moved with the kind of economy that came from military training, the predatory grace that separated professionals from thugs. The lead man was maybe 45, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow and eyes that had seen things that didn't leave you whole. He stopped 10 feet from Declan, close enough to talk but far enough to draw if needed. "Mr. Thorne, my name isn't important. What's important is that our employer would like a word. Tell your employer to call my attorney if they want to schedule a meeting." "This isn't that kind of conversation. You've been asking questions about Ashford Industries' shipping operations, looking at files that don't concern you. I own 51% of the company. Everything concerns me." The second man circled slightly, positioning himself at an angle that would make it harder for Declan to watch both. Standard intimidation tactics, the kind that worked on civilians who'd never been trained to handle multiple threats. Scarface continued, his voice pleasant in the way vipers are pleasant right before they strike. "Our employer suggests you focus on the legitimate aerospace business and leave the logistics optimization to people who understand it. Keep doing what you're doing, and there might be complications." "Is that a threat?" "It's a courtesy warning, the kind we extend once. Next time we won't be so polite." They climbed back into the SUV and drove away slowly, making it clear they weren't fleeing, just delivering a message and leaving on their own terms. Declan stood in the driveway until the vehicle disappeared, then pulled out his phone and photographed the license plate from memory. Sent it to Vance with a simple message, "Find out who they are." Inside the manor, Margot waited in the foyer with a fireplace poker gripped in both hands. She lowered it when she saw Declan, relief washing over her face. "The girls didn't see them. I told them we were doing a security drill." "Good. Keep doing that. I'm hiring a security team to watch the property 24/7. Declan, who were those men?" "People who think intimidation works on everyone. They're wrong." Willa and Nora appeared at the top of the stairs, having heard his voice. "Daddy, we practiced our multiplication tables. Want to quiz us?" The normalcy of the request against the backdrop of armed men and murder investigations created a cognitive dissonance that nearly broke him. But he smiled, climbed the stairs, and spent an hour helping his daughters with homework while his mind calculated angles and probabilities and how to keep them safe while tearing apart the people who'd killed their mother. After the girls went to bed, Declan called Beatrice from Theodore's old study, the room that had become his command center. "Meridian knows I'm digging. They sent contractors to deliver a warning." "I was afraid of that. Declan, you need to back off. Let me bring this to the FBI, work through official channels." "How long would that take?" Silence answered him. "Exactly. Months, maybe years. And the whole time my daughters are targets because I own the company Meridian uses to smuggle weapons. No, I'm not waiting for the system to maybe work while they decide whether killing a billionaire's grandson is worth the risk. Then what's your plan? Force Harrison to testify. He's got documentation, he's got knowledge of the operation. With his cooperation, we can build a case fast enough that Meridian won't have time to disappear. Harrison won't cooperate. He's terrified of Meridian, and he hates you. Then I make him more terrified of me, and I give him something he wants more than revenge. What could you possibly give Harrison that he wants? His freedom and his daughter. The idea had been forming since he'd read that email thread. Harrison hadn't ordered Iris's death. He'd tried to handle her questions himself, had pushed back when Preston suggested direct action. That meant some part of Harrison still cared about his children, still had limits to what he'd tolerate. But Meridian didn't care about Harrison's limits. They'd killed Iris anyway, either as punishment for Harrison's weakness or as preventive maintenance. Either way, Harrison was now a liability to them, a man who knew too much and whose loyalty was suspect, which meant Meridian would eventually clean up that liability. Standard operational security. No witnesses, no loose ends. Declan's phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered on speaker so Beatrice could hear. A woman's voice slurred with alcohol and thick with tears. Declan, it's Celeste. Don't hang up, please. I'm listening. I need to tell you something. About Iris. About what happened. Beatrice leaned forward, mouthing, "Record this." Declan hit the button. Go ahead. 2 weeks before she died, Iris called me. She was scared, Declan, really scared. She said she'd found evidence Dad was involved in something illegal. Weapons smuggling, she thought. She had documents shipping manifests, emails. She asked if I knew anything. Celeste's breathing hitched, catching on sobs she was trying to suppress. What did you tell her? I told her she was being paranoid, that Dad would never do anything illegal. I hung up on her because I was angry that she'd dare accuse our father of crimes. But you knew. The silence stretched long enough that Declan thought she'd hung up. Yes, I knew. Preston Aldridge had shown me the operation a year earlier. He said if I stayed quiet, he'd make sure Dad avoided prison when everything eventually came out. He'd take the fall for the smuggling and Dad would just be a dupe. But if anyone talked, if anyone went to authorities, both Dad and I would be implicated. He had evidence, planted documents with my signature emails from my account approving shipments I never approved. He framed you. He owned me, and I was too much of a coward to stand up to him. So when Iris called asking questions, I shut her down, told her to stop investigating, told her she was going to cause problems for the family. Declan's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. And then she died. 2 weeks later, car accident, the police said. Drunk driver. I believed it because I needed to believe it. Because if it wasn't an accident, if they killed her because she knew too much, then I killed her. My silence killed my sister. Beatrice wrote on a notepad, slid it across the desk. Keep her talking. We need details. Celeste, why are you telling me this now? Because Preston knows I took files from his office. Financial records, shipping logs, communications that prove everything. I've had them for 3 months, too scared to use them. But Preston's been blackmailing Dad. If Dad doesn't make you back off from Ashford Industries, Preston will expose everything. Dad goes to prison. And I think Preston might kill Dad. Cover his tracks. She was crying openly now, the words tumbling out between sobs. I can't let that happen. I already got Iris killed. I can't lose Dad too, even if he's a weak, greedy bastard who got himself into this mess. He's still my father. Where is Harrison now? At the estate. He's transferring money to the Cayman Islands. $2 million in cash. He's planning to run Declan. He's going to disappear and leave Mom and me to deal with Preston. Declan looked at Beatrice, saw his own calculation reflected in her expression. Harrison running meant no testimony, no case, no justice. But more than that, it meant Meridian chasing him, finding him, killing him to ensure his silence. And Willa and Nora would lose their grandfather without ever having the chance to know him as anything other than the man who'd slammed a door in their faces. Iris's voice echoed in memory, something she'd written in her journal months before she died. Don't let hate consume you. My family is broken, but you can still save them. Celeste, I need you to send me those files you took from Preston, all of them, encrypted. Why would you help us after what we did to you? Because Iris would want me to. And because your father is Willa and Nora's grandfather, They've lost their mother. They don't need to lose him too, even if he doesn't deserve the mercy. I'll send them. But Declan, if you go to the estate, if you try to stop Dad from running, Preston might have people watching. It could be dangerous. I've handled dangerous before. He hung up and turned to Beatrice. Call the FBI. Tell them you have a witness willing to testify against Meridian Capital in exchange for immunity. But don't give them Harrison's name yet. I need to get to him first. Declan, this is insane. You're not a hostage negotiator. Let law enforcement handle it. Law enforcement will spook Harrison into running faster. I need him to trust me enough to stand still. He hates you. Hate is just fear wearing a mask. And right now Harrison's terrified. Terrified men do desperate things, but they also listen to people offering them a way out that doesn't end with a bullet or a cell. Beatrice studied him, her lawyer's brain running scenarios and risk assessments. If you're going to do this, you need to understand something. Saving Harrison doesn't erase what he did, doesn't absolve him of his responsibility for Iris's death. I know, but it means my daughters grow up knowing I tried to honor their mother's wishes instead of giving in to the easier path of revenge. That matters more than satisfaction. The drive to Mercer Island felt longer than it was every mile weighted with the knowledge of what waited at the other end. Declan called ahead this time, got Harrison on the phone through sheer persistence and the implied threat that if Harrison didn't answer, Declan would call the police about the money laundering. What do you want? To save your life. Celeste called me. She told me about Preston, about Meridian, about your plan to run. You won't make it, Harrison. They'll find you and they'll kill you. Better than prison. Better than watching everything I built get torn apart by federal investigators. There's a third option. Testify. I've got an attorney negotiating immunity right now. You give the FBI everything you know about Meridian, you walk away free. Harrison's laugh was bitter, broken. You want to help me? After I threw you out in the rain, after I called you worthless? I want to help my daughters keep their grandfather. Iris loved you once before you let greed and fear turn you into someone she couldn't recognize. Maybe there's enough of that man left to do the right thing. The right thing gets me killed. Preston Aldridge doesn't forgive cooperation with law enforcement. Preston Aldridge is going to prison. The files Celeste stole are enough to bring down his entire network. You can either be part of that collapse or you can be the witness who helps ensure he never gets out. Silence on the other end long enough that Declan thought Harrison had hung up. I'm at the estate. Come alone. If you bring police, I run and you never see me again. The Ashford estate looked different at night, less fortress and more mausoleum. The security gate stood open, which sent alarm bells ringing in Declan's head. Harrison wouldn't leave it open if he was trying to flee unnoticed, which meant someone else had opened it. Declan parked on the street instead of the driveway, approached the house from the side garden where shadows provided cover. The front door hung ajar, and through the gap he could see lights on in the living room. He texted Beatrice, "Something's wrong. Gate open, door open. Call FBI now." Her response came immediately. "Already done. ETA 12 minutes. Do not go in alone." But 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours if Meridian's contractors were already inside. Declan had left his service weapon in Virginia when he'd discharged, couldn't legally carry in Washington without permits he hadn't had time to get. But the garden shed yielded a shovel heavy and solid enough to serve as a weapon if it came to that. He eased through the front door, moving with the muscle memory of clearing buildings in Kandahar and Mosul. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that came after violence or right before it. Voices from the living room. 3 men, Russian accents thick enough that Declan caught maybe 1 word in 5, and underneath quieter Harrison begging, "Please, I'll disappear. I'll never talk. Just let me go." Declan reached the living room doorway. Harrison and Margaret knelt on the Persian rug, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Celeste sat on the sofa, mascara running her evening dress torn at the shoulder. 3 men in tactical gear stood over them, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. The lead contractor was the scar-faced man from Whitmore Manor. He held a suppressed pistol loosely, professionally. "You let that son-in-law get too close, Harrison. He has our files now, the ones your stupid daughter stole. We have to clean house. No loose ends, no witnesses, you understand?" He raised the weapon, centered it on Harrison's head. Declan didn't think. Thinking would have told him this was suicide, would have calculated the odds of 1 unarmed man against 3 professionals, and found them lacking. but thinking was the luxury of people who had choices. He stepped into the doorway and threw the shovel. It tumbled end over end, caught the nearest contractor in the temple with a sound like a bat hitting a watermelon. The man went down hard. Chaos erupted. Scarface spun toward Declan, firing. The suppressed rounds punched through drywall inches from Declan's head as he dove behind a marble column. Plaster dust filled the air, and underneath it Margaret screaming, "Run, God, just run!" But Harrison and Margaret were zip-tied, couldn't run even if they wanted to. Celeste scrambled off the sofa, crawling toward the dining room on hands and knees. The third contractor flanked right, trying to get an angle on Declan's cover. Standard tactics. Declan grabbed a bronze sculpture from the side table, some abstract thing that weighed maybe 20 pounds, and hurled it low and hard. It caught the contractor's knees. He went down with a curse, and Declan closed the distance before the man could recover. A kick to the jaw that had all of Declan's weight behind it, the kind of strike that ended fights fast. 2 down, 1 to go. Scarface had Celeste, now arm around her throat, gun to her temple. She gasped for air, tears streaming, makeup completely ruined. "Drop it or she dies." Declan didn't have anything to drop, but he raised his hands anyway. "Let her go. This is between us. This is business. You cost our organization money and exposure. You die, your family dies, Harrison dies, and Meridian moves on. Clean. Final." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The FBI or local police responding to gunshots in an upscale neighborhood. Either way, time was running out. "You're not getting out of here. Kill us and you're just adding murder to smuggling and conspiracy. Let us go, and maybe you can cut a deal." Scarface laughed, but it sounded wrong. Forced. "Americans and your deals. In my country, we finish what we start." He adjusted his aim pressure on the trigger, increasing. Declan saw it in the man's eyes. The decision made the point of no return. The front door crashed open. FBI tactical team poured through, weapons-trained voices shouting commands that blurred together into noise. "Federal agents, drop the weapon. Hands where we can see them." Scarface looked at the firepower arrayed against him, at the red laser dots painting his chest from 5 different angles. He saw the odds, saw the equation change, and made the smart play. He released Celeste and let the weapon clatter to the floor. "I want lawyer." They zip-tied him next to his unconscious colleagues while EMTs checked Harrison and Margaret for injuries. Beatrice appeared from somewhere, having arrived with the FBI team, and immediately started negotiating immunity agreements for Harrison and Celeste. Agent Linda Torres, the lead FBI investigator, approached Declan where he sat on the porch steps, blood from a scalp graze trickling down his temple. "Mr. Thorne, you want to explain what the hell you were doing here? Saving my father-in-law from being executed by arms dealers? Is that a crime? It is when you interfere with an active federal investigation." "There wasn't an active investigation until I handed you evidence of international weapons smuggling." "You're welcome." Torres sighed, the sound of someone dealing with civilians who didn't understand jurisdiction or protocol. "Harrison Ashford is willing to testify against Meridian Capital. Full cooperation in exchange for immunity. You have something to do with that. I suggested it might be preferable to dying or prison. And the files we received an hour ago from Celeste Ashford Shipping manifests financial records communications. That came from you too. I'm just a concerned citizen trying to see justice done." Torres almost smiled at that. "Concerned citizens don't usually take on international smuggling rings single-handed. You're either very brave or very stupid. My wife is dead because of these people. My daughters almost became orphans. Bravery and stupidity look pretty similar when you've got nothing left to lose." She studied him, her cop eyes seeing more than Declan wanted to show. "We'll need your statement. Everything you know about Meridian Capital, about Ashford Industries' shipping operations, about Theodore Whitmore's investigation." "You'll have it. But Agent Torres, I need to know my daughters. Are they safe now?" "We're moving on Meridian offices in 4 cities tonight. Coordinated raids with Interpol. By morning, the organization won't exist. Your daughters are safe." Declan let out a breath he'd been holding since Margot's call about the SUV. Harrison appeared in the doorway, still shaking from adrenaline and fear. He looked at Declan for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. "You saved my life. After everything I did to you. I saved Willa and Nora's grandfather. Don't confuse the two. I blamed you for Iris's death. Told myself if she'd never married you, if she'd stayed in Seattle, she'd be alive. Maybe she would be, but she wouldn't have been happy. And she chose happiness over safety, love over comfort. I'm not going to apologize for giving her what she wanted. Margaret joined them. Her makeup ruined her perfect facade, completely shattered. Iris loved you. We couldn't understand it, couldn't see what she saw. We thought she was throwing her life away on some nobody. We were wrong. The admission cost her something. Declan could see it in the way she held herself, brittle and close to breaking. Your daughter died because she was investigating corruption in your husband's business. She died doing the right thing while surrounded by people doing wrong things. If you want to honor her memory, start by being the kind of people she would have been proud to call family. He stood, walked toward his car. Beatrice caught up to him halfway across the lawn. Where are you going? Home. To my daughters. To the life I'm building from the ashes. Declan, the FBI will want to debrief you. There's going to be media attention, public scrutiny. This story has everything: billionaire inheritances, weapons, smuggling, murder. You'll be under a microscope. Then they'll see a father protecting his children and honoring his wife's memory. Let them look. He drove back to Capitol Hill through streets that felt different now, lighter somehow despite the rain. Whitmore Manor glowed in the darkness, every window lit, and Margot waited on the porch like a sentinel. The girls, asleep. They don't know anything happened. I told them you were working late. Good. Let's keep it that way for now. Inside, Declan climbed the stairs to the bedroom. Willa and Nora shared a room they'd decorated with paintings and drawings and all the creative chaos of 6-year-olds given space to be themselves. They slept tangled together, blankets kicked off Willa's arm, thrown over Nora's shoulder in unconscious protection. He stood in the doorway and made silent promises to keep them safe, to teach them their mother's values: courage, compassion, the belief that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the easy thing, to build something lasting from Theodore's fortune and Iris's legacy. But first, there was work to finish. 4 months after coordinated FBI raids dismantled Meridian Capital's network across 4 continents, the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle smelled like marble and decisions that couldn't be undone. Declan sat on a wooden bench outside the grand jury room, watching lawyers in tailored suits navigate corridors with the certainty of people who understood power's architecture. Agent Torres emerged from the conference room where she'd been coordinating with prosecutors, her expression carrying the grim satisfaction of someone who'd just watched dominoes fall in exactly the right order. Harrison's testimony is solid: names, dates, shipping routes, financial transactions. With Celeste's documents corroborating everything, we've got enough to indict Preston Aldridge and 14 Meridian executives. Beatrice looked up from the brief she'd been annotating. What about the murder charges, Iris and Theodore? Torres's satisfaction dimmed. That's where it gets complicated. Thomas Palmer's car shows signs of computer tampering, but we can't definitively prove remote access. The Rohypnol and the $50,000 payment establish motive, but without Palmer alive to testify, it's circumstantial. Same with Theodore. Swiss authorities won't reopen the investigation. Declan's jaw tightened. So they get away with 2 murders. They get 25 to life for weapons trafficking and money laundering. Preston Aldridge will die in prison. It's not the same as murder convictions, but it's something. The word hung there, inadequate and final. Something. Not justice exactly, not closure, just the grinding forward momentum of a system that prioritized what it could prove over what it knew to be true. Beatrice closed her file with a sound like a gavel falling. There's one more issue, Declan. Preston wants to negotiate. Torres shifted her weight, uncomfortable in a way that suggested federal prosecutors didn't like whatever Preston was offering. He's claiming he has information about your grandfather's business dealings, alleges Theodore wasn't as clean as his reputation suggested. He wants to trade that testimony for a reduced sentence. The accusation landed with the weight of old sins resurfacing. Declan thought about Theodore's letter about buying Harrison's debts to protect his grandson. Brilliant but emotionally limited, the kind of person whose past might contain compromises that looked different under harsh light. Let him talk. I want to hear what he claims my grandfather did. The deposition room was smaller than Declan expected, just a table and recording equipment, and Preston Aldridge looking diminished in orange prison scrubs. The CEO persona had evaporated in the months since his arrest, leaving behind something harder and meaner. His attorney had coached him to speak carefully, but Preston's ego wouldn't allow careful. Theodore Whitmore sold avionics components to my predecessor in 1998. Flight control systems navigation equipment. He knew where those parts were going and helped route them through shell companies to avoid export restrictions. Beatrice's pen moved across her notepad without looking down. "Do you have documentation?" Preston smiled without warmth. Theodore kept everything. Check the 1998 archives in his personal safe. Declan had been through that safe, had found the journal and files about Harrison. But he'd focused on recent years. He hadn't gone back 28 years. Torres leaned forward. If Theodore was complicit in illegal arms sales, why did he spend the last 3 years building a case against Meridian? Guilt. Theodore got out of the dirty business, went legitimate, spent decades washing blood off his hands with charity. But he knew what he'd done. That's why he never went to authorities himself. He couldn't expose us without exposing his own past. The logic held a terrible symmetry. All that money Theodore had donated, all those programs and initiatives. A man trying to balance scales that could never truly balance. Preston's attorney sensed advantage. "My client is willing to testify to Theodore Whitmore's involvement in exchange for reducing his sentence from 25 years to 15. Beatrice didn't hesitate. "Absolutely not. Whatever Theodore did or didn't do in 1998 doesn't reduce Preston Aldridge's culpability for murders, smuggling, and conspiracy." Preston's smile widened. "Then depose everyone Theodore ever worked with. But first, check that safe." The drive back to Capitol Hill felt heavy with the knowledge that Preston wasn't lying. Declan could feel it in his bones, the way you feel rain coming before the first drops fall. Margot met him at the door, concern in her eyes. "The girls are at the community center with the art instructor." "Good." The 1998 files were there exactly where Preston said they'd be. Declan spread them across Theodore's desk while Beatrice photographed each page with methodical precision. The evidence was damning in its banality. Theodore hadn't been a criminal mastermind. He'd been a businessman who'd taken a contract that looked legitimate on paper, sold avionics to a company building helicopters for oil field operations. The fact that those helicopters ended up with weapons hard points, that was technically deniability. Except Theodore had known. A letter from his attorney in 1999 warning him the buyers were flagged by State Department intelligence. Theodore's response, handwritten in the margins: "Contract is signed. Breaking it would cost millions in penalties. Proceed with delivery." Money over morals. The same calculus that had turned Harrison into a smuggler, just dressed in better suits. Declan sat back in Theodore's chair, staring at documents that recontextualized everything he'd inherited. The fortune protecting his daughters had been built partially on weapons that had killed people like the civilians he'd treated in Syria. Beatrice finished photographing. "This doesn't change what Preston did, but it makes Theodore less innocent. It makes him human. Someone who made bad choices early and spent the rest of his life trying to atone." Margot spoke from the doorway. "He confessed to me in his final months. Told me about the 1998 contracts, how he'd prioritized profit over conscience. Said it haunted him every day. That's why he bought Harrison's debts. He saw himself in Harrison's situation." She moved into the room. "Theodore left those files there deliberately. He wanted you to know the truth. Wanted you to understand that the money came from complicated sources. He was giving you a choice: keep the wealth and accept its origins, or reject it. The choice wasn't that simple." Declan thought about Willa and Nora, about the community center they were building, about scholarship programs and veteran housing funded by Theodore's estate. Rejecting the money meant condemning thousands to worse circumstances just to maintain moral purity. "What would you do, Margot?" She considered the question. "I'd acknowledge the truth without letting it paralyze you. Your grandfather did something wrong and spent the rest of his life trying to make amends. You're not responsible for his choices, but you are responsible for what you do with what those choices created. Use the money to do good. That's the only redemption available to any of us." Beatrice gathered the files. "I'll notify the prosecutors that Preston's allegations are accurate but immaterial to his case. Theodore's reputation will take a small hit among people who read footnotes, but the larger legacy survives." Declan looked at the portrait of Theodore beside the fireplace. "File the documents, but donate everything to university archives in 20 years. Sealed until then, but eventually available to historians. The truth should exist even if we're not shouting it." Beatrice nodded approval. The phone rang. Torres. Preston's playing another card. Claims he has information about a meeting tonight, a broker flying in to negotiate taking over Meridian's routes. He wants witness protection and 15 years instead of 25. Where's the meeting? Pier 59. Midnight. Question is, do we believe him? Declan ran calculations. Preston was desperate, would say anything, but desperate men sometimes told the truth. What's your plan? Surveillance. Watch the meeting, identify the broker, build the next case. That could take years. Or I could show up, draw out the broker long enough for your team to move in. Silence. You're a civilian. I can't authorize you as bait. Then don't authorize it. I'll just happen to show up with the encrypted hard drive. If a broker mistakes me for someone willing to deal, that's unfortunate timing. Declan, these people killed your wife. Then make sure your surveillance team is close enough to prevent them from killing me. He hung up before she could argue. Beatrice was already on her phone. I need a wire that can't be detected and body armor that fits under a suit. She covered the phone, looked at Declan. If you're doing this, you're doing it with every advantage we can manufacture. Torres will have FBI units on site, but I'm hiring private security as backup. That's excessive. Your daughters need a father who comes home alive. Excessive is the minimum acceptable standard. The hours until midnight crawled past. Declan reviewed surveillance photos of Pier 59, memorizing sightlines and exit routes. He called Willa and Nora at the community center, listened to them talk about paintings they'd made. I love you both, more than anything in the world. Willa's voice carried the seriousness of 6-year-olds who sensed something important. We love you too, Daddy. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Just wanted to hear your voices. Mommy used to say that. The parallel cut deep. Iris had said that the day before she died. Your mommy was very smart. He hung up before emotion could leak through. Beatrice returned with equipment, a wire in his collar, a panic button disguised as a cufflink body armor thin enough to hide. She made him practice until muscle memory took over. Torres has 20 agents positioned. Snipers on roofs, tactical teams in vans, marine unit in the water. If anything goes wrong, help arrives in under 30 seconds. The pier stretched into darkness when Declan arrived at midnight, a landscape of shipping containers and rusting cranes. He walked the concrete expanse alone, feeling eyes watching from positions he couldn't see. A black Mercedes pulled up exactly on time. Single-occupant older man in a coat that cost more than most cars. He stopped 10 feet away. Mr. Thorne, I was told to expect someone from Meridian with access to their financial records. Preston Aldridge sent me. Yes, I heard about his unfortunate legal troubles. You have the documentation. Declan pulled the encrypted hard drive from his pocket. Financial records, shipping routes, customer lists. Everything Preston built. And you're willing to sell this? I'm willing to negotiate. The broker smiled. You're not affiliated with Meridian. You're Theodore Whitmore's grandson. Preston thinks you're investigating him, but really you're positioning to take over his network. Declan let the silence stretch. Theodore spent years building cases against smugglers. Then he died before seeing any prosecuted. I'm finishing what he started. Better management. That's what they all say before becoming exactly what they replaced. Maybe I'm someone who understands that eliminating supply doesn't eliminate demand. The question is whether that movement serves chaos or control. The broker studied him. You're wearing a wire, and there are federal agents positioned around this pier. This isn't a negotiation, it's a trap. Declan's hand moved toward the panic button, but the broker was already backing toward the Mercedes. I appreciate the effort, Mr. Thorne. Preston was right, you're dangerous. Not because you're ruthless, but because you believe you're doing the right thing. Those are the ones who cause the most damage. The windows rolled down, revealing 2 occupants holding automatic weapons. Federal agents, drop your weapons. The broker's voice carried over the chaos. Agent Torres, tell your teams to lower their weapons, or my associates will fire. We're leaving now. Torres appeared weapon-trained but not firing. Let them go. The words cost her something, but she holstered signaled teams to stand down. The Mercedes pulled away slowly. Declan stood in the sudden quiet, adrenaline draining. Torres approached. That was stupid. But now you have photos of the broker license plate, evidence your surveillance captured. Evidence that leads nowhere if he's smart. Beatrice emerged with her security contractors. The broker knew about the investigation. Someone's feeding information. Torres nodded. Which means there's a leak. The revelation felt inevitable. Corruption wasn't an aberration, it was background radiation. His phone buzzed. Margot. The girls are asking when you'll be home. Tell them an hour. And Margot, thank you. Just come home safe. The trial, when it finally came, felt like watching a machine process grief into something manageable. Declan sat in the gallery while Harrison testified with the resignation of someone who'd accepted his life had fundamentally changed. The prosecutor guided Harrison through the timeline. When did you learn the containers weren't legitimate aerospace parts? 6 months after taking Meridian's loans. By then I was in too deep. Preston had documentation implicating me. Did you try to stop it? Harrison's voice broke. When my daughter started asking questions, I tried. Preston laughed. Said I'd go to prison either way. What happened to your daughter? She died. Car accident, police said. But I knew. The defense objected. The judge sustained. But the damage was done. The jury deliberated 6 hours, returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Preston to 4 consecutive life terms. Preston showed no emotion, just stood and accepted it. But when the bailiffs led him away, he looked back at Declan one final time. Their eyes met. Preston nodded slowly. Recognition, or respect, or just acknowledgement. Declan walked out into Seattle sunshine that felt wrong for the occasion. Beatrice waited by the car. It's over. Preston dies in prison. Meridian's dismantled. Harrison keeps his immunity. Is it justice? It's what the system provides. Harrison and Margaret appeared on the courthouse steps, looking lost. Celeste stood apart, months of therapy creating healthy distance. Margaret saw Declan, walked over carefully. Thank you for saving Harrison's life. I didn't do it for you. I know, but it saved us anyway. Harrison joined her. I'd like to see my granddaughters, if you'll allow it. The request should have triggered rage. Instead, Declan just felt exhausted. Sunday dinners, once a month, at Whitmore Manor. You follow my rules, respect my boundaries. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. We will, I swear. Celeste approached last. I'm moving to Portland, starting over. There's a nonprofit helping domestic abuse victims. They hired me as fundraising director. That's good. Using your privilege for something that matters. Iris would have approved. She was right about most things. I'm sorry I didn't listen when she tried to warn me. I can't change that, but I can spend my life trying to be better. Declan nodded. Forgiveness would come later, maybe. But acknowledgement was a start. 2 years after Iris died, Declan stood in Whitmore Manor's study and opened Theodore's final letter, the one Beatrice had discovered in the safe's hidden compartment. Declan, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't, brought justice to people who thought themselves above it. The art collection is worth $287 million. The will directs you to sell it and use proceeds for charitable purposes. I suggest establish the Iris Thorne Memorial Foundation for Arts Education, create veteran family housing, fund investigation of corrupt firms preventing future Meridians. You keep the manor and $10 million for security. The rest changes lives. That's the only redemption any of us get, using what we have to make the world less cruel. I loved you from a distance. It wasn't enough. But perhaps it was something. Your grandfather, Theodore. Declan called Beatrice to begin selling the collection. Museums and collectors descended. The final auction total reached $312 million. The foundation launched on the 1-year anniversary of Iris's death, funding free art education in 50 cities, scholarships for creative careers, museum accessibility programs. But the real transformation came 2 years later. Whitmore Manor's grand reopening as the Iris Thorne Community Arts Center drew 600 people. The Victorian beauty had been preserved perfectly through 18 months of restoration, original woodwork, stained glass, hardwood floors creaking in all the right places. Local families enrolled children in free classes. Veterans found housing through foundation programs. Journalists covered the transformation from private mansion to public resource. Harrison and Margaret came sitting in the back row watching their granddaughters cut the ribbon with pride they hadn't earned, but felt anyway. Celeste sent flowers and a note. Iris would love this. Declan stood in Theodore's garden watching Willa and Nora, now 8, teach younger children to mix watercolors and find the exact shade of green that matched the trees. Margot appeared with tea. Theodore would be proud, not just of what you built, but of who you've become. He'd probably tell me I'm too sentimental. He'd be wrong. The best decisions always are. Through windows, Declan could see art classes in session, hear laughter and creative chaos unleashed. This was what Theodore's complicated money had bought, what Iris's death had demanded, what Declan's grief had built as alternative to destroying himself with rage. Is it enough? Does any of this balance what was lost? Margot considered. Nothing balances that scale. But you're not trying to balance it. You're using what remains to build something lasting, something that multiplies good beyond what you can measure. That's all any of us can do, take the broken pieces and make something beautiful from the wreckage. His phone buzzed. Torres. Broker arrested in Brussels. Extradition approved. He'll testify. This is finished. Finished. The word suggested closure Declan wasn't sure he felt. But maybe you didn't need to feel finished to move forward. He walked inside to where Willa and Nora were painting a mural, 4 generations holding hands. Theodore, Iris, Declan themselves. Past connected to future through the fragile present where all of them lived. Dad, does it look right? Mommy's smile. Declan studied their work, seeing Iris captured in watercolor and child's perspective. It's perfect, sweetheart. She'd love it. Grandma Margaret says Mommy was the best artist in the family. But I think you're pretty good too. I'm not an artist, Nora. I just build things. Building things is art too. Mrs. Margot says so. Through windows, Seattle spread out in rainy glory, a city that had taken everything and given back something different, but maybe equally valuable. Community. Purpose. The knowledge that wealth meant nothing unless you used it to make the world less cruel. Declan stood in the manor Theodore had left him, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by money built on complicated choices. He thought about Preston in prison, Harrison trying to rebuild relationships, Celeste helping others escape toxic families. But mostly he thought about Iris, about the life they'd built on love and hope, about daughters growing into women she'd be proud of. Willa tugged his sleeve paint on her hands and joy on her face. Dad, come paint with us. You can do Mommy's flowers, the wild ones she loved. I'm not very good at painting. That's okay. We'll teach you. And somehow that felt like the best offer he'd received in 2 years. So Declan picked up a brush, let his daughters guide his hand, and together they painted flowers Iris had loved, wild and imperfect and beautiful in ways that couldn't be measured or quantified or bought. The kind of beauty that lasted, the kind that mattered, the kind that proved in the end that love was the only wealth worth inheriting.